Most of us can remember that time in math class where everything changed. We could no longer simply answer a question, but we had to show our work. For students who struggled with math, it was difficult, but it was important because it demonstrated not only that we knew the answer, but we knew how we needed to get there. When it comes to climate, we know what the answer is. We need to cut our greenhouse gas emissions, and we've made some pretty bold pronouncements through my time on this body. In 2014, we said we were going to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2020. We did not make that goal. 50% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. Through great collaborative effort and a really aspirational approach to the work, we've convened the Green Ribbon Commission, the Climate Ready Boston, Carbon Free Boston. This body, I'm proud to say, has done some really effective and important work in this space as well. Elected officials, advocates, experts, even some erstwhile critics all seem to be generally in agreement on what we need to do to address the existential threat that is climate change. We're answering the question correctly, but now it's time for us to show our work. 8 years ago, I stood before this body right around this time as chair of the Government Operations Committee as well as chair of the Environment Committee, urging passage of the Boston Energy Reporting and Disclosure Ordinance, or BERDO. It was the result of a lengthy process with this body and former Mayor Thomas M. Menino. The purpose of BERDO was simple. We were going to measure and hopefully manage utility usage in buildings that were larger than 35,000 square feet. Despite some vociferous opposition, it passed, and it remains one of the pieces of legislation that I am most proud of. During that time, a funny thing happened. Participation exceeded even our highest expectations. The notion that building owners would actually want to make the efforts to make their buildings more energy efficient has proven to be true. And it's just not because of altruism. Energy efficient buildings realize significant utility and management cost savings. Since then, working in concert with so many of you, really with all of you, I'm proud of what has been known as my record on environmental justice, on environmental initiatives. We've led the fight on plastic bag reduction, gas leaks, community choice energy, wetlands ordinance, zero waste, curbside composting, textile recycling, net zero carbon standards for our buildings. But I'm thinking about, as my months on this body come to a close, what really is the most important legacy, the most impactful thing we can do. And it's this, BERDO 2.0. I want to begin by thanking so many people. Jessica Morris from my team, who's been my great quarterback, Allison Breezius from the Environmental Department, who's worked tirelessly on this, and most importantly, the advocates, 5 of whom are sitting behind me, who represent the countless others around the city who's been working on this. Thank you, Ricky Harvey, Andy Krasner, Andy Wells-Bean, Dwayne Tyndall, Sophia Owen, and so many others. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, you know what BERDO stands for, and I'm keeping the acronym, but I'm changing the definition. This is Boston's Emission Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance. Here's how this ordinance will work. We're going to focus on all of Boston's commercial, residential, and institutional buildings that are 20,000 square feet or larger. Starting in 2025 and following every 5 years after, we're setting aggressive but achievable metrics for buildings to reach a substantial cut in their greenhouse gas emissions. There will be different classifications and requirements for each building type. For example, we're not going to hold a hospital to the same standard as a self-storage facility, but we will get to zero for all of them. We're going to work with building owners to help them meet their goals. We'll also allow for an alternative compliance that will help fund an account charged with environmental justice and renewable energy infrastructure. This update includes a new review board from the mayor, with approval from council, and most importantly, members of the community will help drive this bus, this electric bus, and lead us. We're offering both carrots and sticks, and we're going to finally create the blueprint or the green print for Boston to become an international leader in greenhouse gas reduction. Keep in mind, when we passed BERDO 1.0, very few cities around the country had something similar, and many followed our lead. I had calls from our colleagues in municipal government around the country saying, how did you do this? How did you deal with opposition from some folks, developers? And it was about a collaborative effort. This will put us as an international leader. When passed, this ordinance will only impact 3,500 buildings. That accounts for 4% of our building stock. 4%. And in those 4%, those 4% of buildings account for nearly 60% of all building emissions in the city of Boston. This policy would result in an estimated total savings of nearly 37 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere over the next 30 years. When it comes to the existential threat of climate change, once again, we know what to do. We need to cut our greenhouse gas emissions. This ordinance is how we get there. We've talked the right talk, and I don't mean that as a criticism, because we've talked about some really important things and put some really aspirational plans together. This is going to get this done. I have 6 months left as your colleague, as a member of this body. And perhaps this won't be the only ordinance that I introduce. In fact, there's one coming right after this. But this is something that I really want to be known as our legacy. I've told you all before, and I think, so many colleagues know this, that perhaps the greatest perspective I received came on September 9th of 2020 when I became a parent. And this ordinance is not only important to me as a leader in this city, as a colleague of all of you, but I'm doing this for Margot. And I'm doing this for Benjamin and Maxine and Stephen and Caroline and Cass and Blaze and Aiden and Alexander and Patrick and Michael and Elizabeth and Jack and Douglas and Charlie and Caden and Samir and Annalise. We're going to get this done, folks. Thank you very much.